did what I usually do. I went through my ties to see if I could find one with an angry Jesus on it. Those things are hard to find. And one of the thoughts that then went in my mind is, if I had one, would Jesus have the halo? You know, and we saw an image of one that Stephanie found for us today, and there wasn't a halo on it. No, there wasn't. That says more about us than it does about Jesus, but nonetheless, I'm guessing that no one here has a picture of an angry Jesus in your house. Anybody happen to have one? I didn't think so. Yeah. So there's something crucially important about this event. It's one of the few things that reside in all four Gospels. There aren't a lot of things that do. Now, John has this in the second chapter, early in his Gospel. The only thing that's happened is that Jesus did his first miracle just before this. Anybody remember what the first miracle that Jesus did in the book of John? Turned the water into wine. Yeah. And so right after that, then Jesus goes into the temple. Now, in the Gospel of John, John is really not too interested in chronology. So when he says something happens here or there, it's more to make a point. But anyway, so he has it in the beginning. The Synoptic Gospels, synoptic means similar or same. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're a lot alike. They have the events just before Jesus is captured, goes through Holy Week, and then goes to the cross. And they see this passage of Jesus going in the temple and making a mess of things as one of the things that led to his death. It says in there that after Jesus had done this, religious leaders began to meet privately to figure out how to get rid of this guy. So that's how they see it. John, however, sees it more as an overriding theme of his entire gospel. It sets the tone, if you will. Jesus comes to purify a corrupted religious system and to turn people's relationship back to God and away from things and stuff. He's saying relationships with God do not require an intermediary. So this kind of overrides the entire Gospel of John. Many things he does can be seen in relationship to this. Now, the one thing that confuses me about this passage is the religious leader's response. Well, actually, they have two responses. One seems perfectly normal, but the other one confuses me. The first response, what did they say to him? What's your thought? What are you doing this for? Who told you you could do this? You're not a priest. Why are you doing this? By what authority? Now that makes sense. If somebody came into your house and started making a mess, you'd say the same thing, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Maybe not in those words, but you'd find a way to convey that question to them. The second response, you remember what that was? No, that's a little later. The second response is, what sign are you going to show us? Yeah, that's the question. What sign are you going to show us? That seems to me to be a very strange question. Especially since this is early in John's Gospel, and the only thing that's happened before it is turning water into wine. So, maybe they're mocking Jesus. Maybe they're mocking Jesus. You're coming in and doing all this. Well, you're going to do us a miracle? You're going to make wine for us? I don't know. It just seems rather strange. But nonetheless, I'm going to let you deal with that however you want. And I'm never going to come back to that again. So, on one level, Jesus is calling into question a system gone bad. Okay, I want you to hear that. A system gone bad. So it started out, it provided legitimate service. There was a problem with Roman coinage. Had a picture of Caesar and said, Caesar is Lord on it. You couldn't take that in the temple. That would be an abomination. And so money changers came and they had coins, temple coins, that they could purchase, and then they could take the temple coin and offer them. It was a service, especially for those who didn't live in Jerusalem. Because if they didn't live in Jerusalem, they didn't have access. Why would they? It's only about the temple. And so it provided a service. Same with the animals. You can imagine that if you were going to sacrifice an animal, you had to come great distances by foot. know? It's much easier if you don't bring an animal, because then you don't have to care for it, you don't bring food, you don't need to do all of that stuff that goes with it. You can just come to the temple, stop at the 7-Eleven, and pick up an animal. It made a lot of sense. And not only that, but animals that came had to be unblemished. Couldn't just be any old animal. Had to be an unblemished animal. And so I can imagine that some of those who came from a great distance, if they brought their own animal, would worry a bit about the priest would find that there's a blemish in it. And then what do they do? It's kind of like me when I go take the cars in to be smogged. You know, I always worry that they're going to find something, and then what am I going to do? You know? And I suspect they had that same kind of thing. And so to go and get an animal that's already pre-approved, you didn't have to worry about that. That was a service. The problem became, the system became corrupted. People began to make money off of others, especially the poor. They raised the prices way up. It's like if you went to the Super Bowl, one of the Super Bowl cities, you got there 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, you know, the amount of that you would pay for the room would be like right here. If you went on Super Bowl weekend, you're paying 4 or 5 times more for that hotel room. Well, that's what happened. There was a captive audience. And they began to gouge people. And that's what Jesus was against. Now, there's a question that I'm sure has come to all of us at one point. I had a discussion with a young woman about this, and she said, well, what about all the stuff that we do on Sunday mornings? You know, we have coins for Africa. You know, it would have been a good children's story to tip this over, but I would have had to clean it up, and I probably would have broke that. So, but what about the things we do? Today we've got coins for Africa, we've got corned beef and cabbage tickets. You know, on different times we had youth group who does bake sales and all that kind of stuff. And I shared, Jesus was angry at the abuses of the system. Anything that we do here pretty much is a bargain, right? You go to the new U table, you're going to find a bargain or two. You know, maybe more than you want to find. So it's not really talking, that's not what Jesus is about. And then the other part of it just came to me was that for most of us, my age and older, stores weren't open on Sundays. You didn't buy yourself stuff on Sundays. It just was, you just didn't do it. I mean, that was the cultural thing. And so that sits somewhere in our psyche, and that's part of that question that we have. I don't think many of us linger with that question, but it comes to us, and I think that needs to have some clarity about it. Separating culture from forms of religion is difficult. And that's part of what Jesus was about. This culture that had gone around about having to sacrifice animals was indeed separating people from God. Throughout his ministry, Jesus often questioned other customs and rules that did not bring life but enslaved people. In one of the groups on Renegade Gospel, we talked about one of the scriptures. Remember the story of the pool of Siloam? It was supposed to have magical powers, and so people would sit around the pool all day long because they knew whenever the waters were troubled, the first one in would be healed. And so they'd sit there day after day after day, and Jesus came and said to one of them, "Do you want to be healed?" And they go, "Well, of course, I'm here waiting to get in. You want to help me in?" And Jesus said, "The custom's killing you. You want healing, go to God." Jesus constantly questioned customs and rules that enslaved. And all of this is a bit ironic, now having all of these money changers and the animal sellers in the temple at Passover. And Passover, it marks a time of freedom from slavery. It's just a bit ironic. Now, at a deeper level, Jesus was pointing to and demanding an end to the sacrificial system. He wasn't just putting them out for that particular Saturday, or whenever it was. He was clearing them out and saying, this is no longer a system that God wants. And he points to some of the prophets who long ago had said, God doesn't want your sacrifice. God wants your obedience. Obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you will be my people, and walk in the ways that I've commanded you. And he remembers Jeremiah, who said, God will write the law on each heart. No longer do you have to go to a priest. You can go to God. And so Jesus was calling into question the whole system of sacrifice. It was too easy. Buy a bird, get forgiveness. And it wasn't what God wanted. And at an even deeper level for John, Jesus not only demands the end of the sacrificial system, he himself marks the end of that system and becomes the new way. He takes away the sacrificial system and he begins to say, I am the way. He has lots of I am statements. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the light. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. And so, in the Gospel of John, he takes away those things that God doesn't want anymore, those sacrificial systems, those rules and things that bind people. And he said, but I'm the way. Look to me and you will find God. That's John's theological message for us. But are there things for us to learn, to do? Maybe we've gotten too familiar with the rules of Christian faith. Maybe we've gotten too familiar. Have we gotten used to holy Jesus, meek and mild? That's the only Jesus we see, and when there's an angry Jesus up there, we cringe a little bit. Have we gotten too used to Jesus, our friend? Those are some of the questions that we're asking in the book Renegade Gospel, as we're studying with Mike Slaughter. Where have we gotten too chummy with God? You get too chummy with someone, you begin to take them for granted. You begin to take advantage of them. That's how it works in our personal relationships. That's how it can work with God. When is it that we just feel safe, so it doesn't matter? Those are serious Lenten questions. One pastor put it like this: reverence and awe have often been replaced by the yawn of familiarity. Consuming fire has been domesticated into a candle flame, adding a bit of religious atmosphere perhaps, but no heat, no binding light, no power or purification. Where have we become satisfied with just living our lives, referencing God once in a while, and living in a way that is not holy and just? Do we talk about radical love and yet play it safe? Where do we go? Barbara Brown Taylor, who is about my age, so just a kid, she tells a story about when she was a teenager. She said, when I was 16, I visited a Baptist church with some friends and heard sin defined clearly for the first time. Sin was rebellion against God, which could take any number of forms. The youth minister warned us against drinking and drugs and sex outside of marriage. He made sure we knew the 10 Commandments. His narrative worldview went something like this: no matter how hard we try, human beings are inherently corrupt. God tries all kinds of things to save us. God finally sends his Son. Those who believe in him are free from sin. She said, this story was communicated to me with such genuine passion for my salvation that I joined the church and was baptized again by immersion. The church became my safe haven. It felt so safe to me that one Saturday night I brought a couple of runaway boys with long hair to church in hopes of finding them a place to stay. Before the evening was over, we were all turned out into the night and asked not to come back. Where do we hold open the church doors or our friendship only to those who are safe? How do we do that? Where do we do that? It's a serious Lenten question. We often limit God's love to those things we do, we like, we think. We got it down. So that must be what God loves. And of course, we are safely and firmly in the center of that. It's a good place to view everybody else to see if they're in or out. Over the last few hundred years, many a Christian and clergy person has been astonished to find Jesus take a whip to racism and sexism. I watched a PBS special on the Klan. And at one point, it talked about those people who were so involved in the things of the Klan and so enamored of it, and at some point they realized they were dead wrong. And they said things like, I don't know what I was thinking. Sometimes we get caught up in our own ways, just like Jesus is saying, this isn't what God wants. The United Methodist Church is going to be fighting over whether gay people are loved or not. It's going to be a lot in the news in the next year. Where is God's love? To whom does it go? Every time we try and limit God's love, we are moving ourselves away from God. We accept God's love freely. Why not offer it freely? Once we found God's love, we began to think that if we're nice enough, we're fine. If we're nice enough, we're fine. You know? Look at her. She's such a good Christian because she's so nice. You know? Brad's such a Christian man because he's just so nice. You know? Ask him anything, he's going to help you. What's nice got to do with it? Where's that angry Jesus? Nice isn't enough. I'm not saying don't be nice. I'm saying that's not the mark of what it is to live in God's love. William Willimon recognizes this Lenten action of Jesus when he says, the table that Jesus is turning over is mine. That distant, awesome God, the one whom Moses met on a mountain, has been domesticated, tamed to the level of a business transaction. Here, put your money in here, and you will get a little dose of the divine. The question for you for Lent, or one of the questions for you for Lent, is what tables do I have that need to be turned over by Jesus? What customs and things do I have that keep other people out? What are the things that I'm doing that God would not want us to do? We can fall prey to that Christian version of buy a bird, get forgiveness. It is seeing prayer as cause and effect. Just pray and you'll get what you want. That's not how it works. Because if you pray and don't get what you want, then something must be wrong with you and the way you pray or with God. But that's not what prayer is about. That's not to say God doesn't answer prayers, but we're not called to say this is what I want and expect it to come right away. That's not how it works. Just like the sacrificial system didn't work that way. Jesus was angry. Aristotle once said, anyone can become angry, that's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is difficult. This is difficult. Melvin Wheatley once said, there are situations in life in which the absence of anger would be the essence of evil. If you are confronted with an evil situation or you see someone else being abused, to not be angry is an evil thing. Now, anger also needs to be selfless. Jesus wasn't angry because he couldn't afford a pigeon, but he saw others who couldn't. To have anger is to have anger at that which is unjust. God is love. God's love cannot be taken for granted, nor withheld from others. What are the tables we have in our lives that Jesus might come in and overturn? Where are the places in our lives